everyone. Welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast, and thanks for joining us on the epic adventure we call writing. We're your hosts,
Holly Robilliard,
Austin Matthews,
and Bob Dotto. And today we're going to be talking about Show Don't Tell with Jeff Nelson, special guest. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. Hey, what's up, guys?
What's going on? I know, just for listeners, we had him on before. This is our second time with Jeff. We had him on with fighting, right? Fighting sequence.
Yes. Writing fighting scenes. Yep.
Yeah, writing fighting scenes. So that was fun.
Yeah.
So what's going on with you?
Oh, not much. I have my book coming out next month, so that's pretty exciting. It's been a almost 3-year process from the idea to the book. So yeah, I came up with it in like April of 2022, I think. So just about 3 years. It's been a long process. But yeah, I mean, it's the first book I ever published, and it's kind of cool where where you make something and it's pretty much the thing that you wanted to make when you first came up with it.
Yes, absolutely.
No, all of mine completely are different than what I want to do.
I mean, that's frustrating too. Don't get me wrong. I've had that experience too, and I literally just want to. I'm not very happy when it happens.
Yeah,
but I think this is definitely like exactly what I wanted it to be, which is kind of
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the name of the book?
It's called Ninja Punks Fuck Off. Is the name of the book.
Nice. I guess it's about ninjas.
Yeah. So it's kind of about. It's basically the hero's journey, but it's about punk rock and ninjas on the very surface level, because I was a kid who grew up in the 90s, and ninjas were pretty much the coolest thing in the world to every kid who's that age. I mean, come on, they were everywhere. I mean, the Power Rangers were ninjas. There was the Ninja Turtles. There was a bunch of stuff and involving ninjas. So, and given that I wanted to be, I think I said in 4th grade, they asked who or what we wanted to be when we grew up, and my answer was Akuma from Street Fighter. That was actually what I said.
Ooh, nice.
Everyone was like, "Oh, I want to be a waitress, or I want to be, a doctor, or lawyer, or or a spaceman." I was like, "I want to be Akuma," and she was like, "Who's that?" It was like, "Who's that?" But anyway, so I basically took that and combined it with kind of my experiences with punk rock when I was younger, because I was kind of a punk kid. And, as most folks who are punks can say, you meet some not great people at some of those clubs. It's often very much romanticized in the media. You talk about the Dogtown and Z-Boys, where I think Jay Adams is very romanticized. All these figures are kind of and even Sid Vicious to a degree, but they're all very tragic, messed up people. Mm-hmm. None of them are really functioning. Right. And basically, it's kind of it's more or less my rationalization with how I see punk in my life now than I did when I was younger and more mature. That's basically that's basically kind of what it's about. And it gets pretty existential and deep. The first chapter, I believe, I was actually me and Holly, we swapped books, and I was thinking man, when she sees this first chapter and it's in semi Homeric prose and it's talking about ninjas and the shogunates, she's basically gonna think I'm crazy. But I was like, hey, whatever, I'll send it and see what she thinks. It's so yeah, it does get pretty out there. The editor I was working on it with was basically dude, everyone on the team is trying to talk about what genre this is, and no one can figure it out. I'm like, I don't know. It's just something I made up. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just is.
like, listen, I'm not trying to say like anything about like who I am as a writer. I could be a freaking terrible writer. I don't know, but like I feel like when writers like, I don't think Tolkien tried to write a fantasy novel. I think he just tried to write Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
I think so.
And that's kind of what's kind of cool, I think, with this new age of media, where because agents were the ones who really were the ones who enforced genre. Because you have to go to an agent and say, "Oh, I have a fantasy book. It's this long," or a crime book this long, and that's kind of what really fragmented the genres for so long. But now in this new era with the internet and things like that, it's really giving space for some pretty cool new ideas coming out. Which is kind of about this whole new era of like, media.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well said.
Yeah. But
that's coming out. When does it come out?
It's coming out October 30th. I think that's what my yes.
Okay. October 30th, and where at?
So it's going to be on Amazon, and I also believe Barnes and Noble. I believe those are the two sites. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
I have to interject as well and say that although there was a lot of amazing is it martial arts stuff? I'm going to totally ruin this. The fight scene, I don't know exactly what type of fighting it was, and I know that I should probably know this. But it was like that first chapter.
Yeah.
Incredible. Like even for someone who doesn't understand anything about what you're writing about, or doesn't really understand anything about any sort of like fighting or anything like that, other than things that I imagine that I can do. But most likely cannot. It was so well done, and it didn't make me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to read this whole book. Like it was done in a way that I could completely understand what was happening. And I think that must have been so difficult for you to do, because like to be able to write it in a way that, and a total imbecile like me can understand. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
For me, like, I don't think of fighting as like very stylistic anymore, because it's really not. There's really only two martial arts. There is grappling and there is striking. That's really it. Like every other martial art is just kind of a variation on those two very, very fundamental fundamental approaches to fighting. And so once you kind of understand that, and you're just like, oh, you can just kind of like you can pretty much make anything work. Like there are fighters who do things that are like, you would never ever do that or coach that if you're a boxing coach, but they've knocked out like dozens of guys with it. So that's kind of how I see it. Like I basically realize that it's a fight and it's crazy, and because I know it's a fight and it's crazy, I'm just like, okay, go. Like, and that's kind of what I feel like a lot of folks who write martial arts based stuff who have never trained, they kind of make that mistake where it's like, oh, he switched from Kempo to Taekwondo to throw this kick. I'm like, that's not what a fighter is thinking about when they are fighting. It's just not. And that's kind of like, yeah. And so that's kind of
what I don't want to get kicked right now. That's what I usually think.
But yeah, that's kind of like, but that was kind of my approach to the fight scenes and things like that. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, okay, good. So October 30th, Ninja Punks Fuck Off at Barnes & Nobles and Amazon. Language. Sorry if there's kids listening, and if you're a kid, I just heard like there's like first graders, out playing on the street. I was just walking my dog, and I was out there, and these kids were like, "Oh my god, oh look at this shit! Oh my god!" And I was like, "Wow, first graders, okay, all right, whatever. I guess this is just the new 2024. I guess I don't know." But,
I made that mistake too, where I've been driving and then like I'm blasting a very not appropriate song through a neighborhood, and my windows down. I'm like, oh, I should probably turn this down. Yeah.
I feel like my language was much worse when I was in elementary school than it is now. Like,
when I was in high school, I literally just tried to be as offensive as possible. Every bad word you could say, I said. Like, I just, yeah.
That
So
works.
yeah, it was very fun to raise.
Oh yeah.
My parents had a ball.
Yeah, the angsty teen. That's when you need to use all that language, right?
Yeah. But so we're talking about show don't tell. Sorry, I don't mean to steer the podcast. Sorry.
No, that's
Yeah,
where we're
no.
going. Yeah,
Perfect.
that's where we're going. Yeah, show don't tell.
Yeah.
How about one of us, not me because I talk too much. Somebody else explain what show don't tell is. Like we always like to. We want to talk to our new writers who are listening that have no idea what because the first time I saw that I was like, what the heck does that mean? So what does it mean to show don't tell, Austin?
Okay, so I'm gonna say I think that there's the very surface level of like you get a lot of people like don't be like, oh, it's nighttime. Be like the moon is high in the sky. But I think a more important version is whenever you're talking about like a person, don't say, oh, they're a very strict person. Show them being strict instead of telling us they're a strict character. Or don't say the empire is oppressive. Show them oppressing people. And I think that's more of what I see it as opposed to you can say it's nighttime. That's fine. Like you don't need to spend 3 paragraphs on everything. But I mean, we'll get into that, what we think it should be. So
yeah. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, so I think of it sort of in the same way as Austin. I think ultimately what I try to do with like showing versus telling is to try to kind of activate the senses of the character, where which is to say that showing, I think, so basically it's kind of funny because I was reading a book not too long ago and it made me so mad that I closed it and I threw it against the wall because I was so upset with it. Wow. Like it was called A Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. The story itself is cool and the ideas are cool. And I mean, no offense, I'm not trying to cause any author beefs. I'm just got my first book. Yeah. But, so I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure he's got his fans. Like, awesome. I'm super happy for the guy. I want no issue with Brian. but I was a little bit frustrated with just the writing where, there's a scene where I don't want to spoil it, where it's where a guy has a pistol aimed at a god. And he fires it, and he basically because he's a powder mage in this universe, he can cosmically link with the bullet and guide it or in some way like that. I forget what the exact thing is, but anyway, when he shot and fired it, the only real description that he had was he could almost feel the bullet or something like that, and feel was in all italics or something like that. Or no, he almost felt the bullet or something like that. And I'm like, you've got a scene where a guy is cosmically linking with a weapon to fire at a god, and that's all you can muster. I'm like, that's kind of disappointing. I'm like, it's like, I want to hear about how the tendrils of reality itself, are webbing you and the bullet together as you feel like you're having a string pulled from your chest or something like that. Like just
like
you bring up a really good point. So my general rule is that the more important the moment, the more you need to show. And so if it's not very important, like if I'm just setting a quick scene of like, oh hey, this is a normal thing, like it's nighttime, it's fine. But if it's you shooting a god, unless you do that every Tuesday night, it should.
And that's the thing. There is actually telling does have its place. I feel like after you show something, you can then tell. If you describe a scene where a kid's in a classroom and you show the teacher being mean to the student, and you're writing from the student's point of view, and you say from the student's point of view that they're a jerk, well, then at that point you can do that because you've established that they're a jerk.
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's show and tell, not show don't tell.
That's kind of that's kind of how I see it too. But I mean, I think just sorry.
Yeah, no, and that's true. I guess we should preface all this with these are just suggestions. They're not.
No,
Yeah.
mine are rules.
They're never okay. Sin has rules, but
I'm
just for us, you know, for everybody, like
Right.
writing out your first book. I mean, you look at this stuff. These are strong suggestions, okay,
Mhm.
and hopefully we can explain all that. But yeah, don't ever think like, oh no, I can't do that. Oh, like what did Stephen King say? Oh, the road to hell is paved with adverbs or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, like my first book, I did whatever I could to not write adverbs. And then I'm reading everybody else in the world is using adverbs left and right. So I was like, well, screw it.
Well, and I think something too is like there are things that you have to think about the consequences. And like that's the real thing that you need to be worried about is telling and showing have specific consequences. And part of that is that the more that you show, you're spending more time involved in that specific part of the scene, which adds importance or significance to that moment, whether you intend to or not as the author. And so if that's not a significant moment, by you spending, the more you show, then you're telling the audience this is important. If that doesn't pay off at any point and it's not important, the audience feels a little betrayed by that.
Yes, that's true. And actually, it's funny. My editor was actually pretty funny. I wrote out this one scene like in super high detail. It was something so mundane. Like it was like a cop turning up the stereo in his car or something. It was something super like just not important. And it was just like it was like 2.5 paragraphs of detail about that. And my editor's comments, this is so goddamn boring. His comments. I was like, okay, yeah, take it.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Hey, that's a good editor, just being like, hey,
yes, that's what you do.
I call him like I see him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do want an editor like that.
Yeah, it's like writers who ultimately I've seen the common denominator for writers who made it and not are the writers who made it usually just don't care if someone thinks their work is bad or if their editor says like listen, like every time my editor has given a suggestion, like it's not you jeopardizing your vision if you have a strong enough concept as to what your vision is. It's okay, how can I integrate that into the vision and still keep it consistent with what I wanted to do, which is possible. It's just, you can't think either yes or no, you've got to think in a bit more in between,
Yeah. Holly, what do you think about Show Don't Tell?
Yeah. Sorry, we got off track. I apologize.
No, that's what we're very good at here. I think that something that we should touch on is why, like, what is the importance of showing versus telling? Because the new writer might not really understand. And that was actually one of the things that I really struggled with in the beginning was I didn't really understand how I should show something versus tell something. And it sounds like now that I understand what it means, I'm like, how was it ever hard to figure this out? Because it seems like it's so simple, but it's really not. And so the reason that we do it right is because we want people to, it's a technique that helps us convey like emotions and settings and characters. And we do that through like vivid descriptions. And we do that through sensory experiences for a character. And the reason we do it that way, and the reason that we say we want to show it, is because then the reader really gets immersed in your story, and the reader can feel what your character is feeling, and then they can relate to your character instead of us just telling them how they should be feeling.
Yeah, like a good way to think of it is that like telling versus showing is the difference between knowing versus feeling. So like if I tell you something, you're going to know that about a character. If I show you that thing, then you're going to feel it. So like it's the most famous thing is probably the, save the cat moment. So like I can tell you the hero is a good guy, but I can also show you saving him a cat. And then he's a good guy. Like you feel him being good or, kick the dog if you're a villain. So
Is that like the alternate to Save the Cat? I've never read Save the Cat. I've heard it's good though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started off as a tight thing, so
it's good. Yeah, it started off as a screenplay, kind of for screenplays, but they wrote an author version of it. So.
That's pretty cool.
But it's really good.
But I read more like I read Campbell, and I've read On Writing, and I've read the William Zinsser on Writing Well, and I've read The Elements of Style by A.B. White. Those are like the for writing books, or like just the narrative and writing books that I've read. So yeah, and for some reason I still couldn't put together like a good book until I had an editor saying, "Hey, this sucks, change it." So
I mean, that super helps. Like having that collaborative ish thing of like, hey, you know what? You have an outside perspective, and it really gives you clarity.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the thing. Like, no matter how talented you are, you're still going to be biased by yourself. You know, like, and that's kind of like what I feel an editor is. Where like, you know, I always tell people where it's like, you know, I'm not an expert on writing, and I'm about to, you know, I'm about to have my first book out and things like that. But by my best understanding of things, that like, no matter how good of a lawyer you are, if you get in trouble, you're going to hire a lawyer. You know,
Sure. Yep.
It's kind of the same concept. You know,
absolutely.
Like, yeah. So that's kind of the same concept. I feel like, you know.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things like you learn a lot of what your blind spots are as a writer. So like for me, like I don't describe characters very much because it's not like a thing I think about. Like the character is the character, the color of their hair isn't important to the plot, so I don't think about it. Like I know what their hair color is, but it doesn't come up very often in the plot. So
well, it's funny that because you can tie that in with show don't tell, where it's like you can describe a character progressively through various actions, where like, so instead of just like front loading the description to this was Bill had Bill wore a trucker hat, a vest, and he had boots on. Bill was very large, you know, like instead of doing things like that, you could say like, oh, he stormed up to the table and threw his trucker hat down with his bulbous hand, and like that describes him in also a very seamless way, you know.
Yeah, and then I like where we're going with this because it's what we're doing is we're inviting the reader into the story, like into our imagination, because our imagination can be crazy, and trying to translate that onto paper can be a chore. And we don't want to like dumb down our audience. Just like I think Jeff, what you experienced, you were just like pissed off, like I'm not an idiot. Like where's the rest of this, you know? And that's not what we want to treat them as if our readers, what they are very intelligent people, and they like. There's a reason why we like to read books because we like imagination. We like to know what a big trucker is doing instead of being told what a big trucker, you know.
And
I think going back to what Austin said too earlier about having that second perspective, that can really help you understand what parts of your story are actually coming across as important to the reader and which ones are maybe being missed. Because it's just like it is with using like a dialogue tag. When we're saying like he said, she said, a reader's just going to skip right over that. And if we say it's dark outside, you know, or it's nighttime, they're going to read that, acknowledge that it's night, and they're going to be able to kind of go past that without really having to think about it because it's not really important. But if you're describing the night as if it's incredibly scary and spooky and there's, you know, potentially something creepy about to happen, then the reader is going to be preparing for something. But then if that thing never comes, they're going to feel like they've missed something or they're going to be left with like that sour taste, right? So it can really help having that second perspective because then you're going to know, okay, this is supposed to be like, it sounds like something important is supposed to happen here, but nothing does. So what am I missing?
Yeah. Well, actually, that reminds me of something that just happened in our writing group with the most recent submission of mine because I mentioned like, oh, instead of saying like, oh, every night, I say like, oh, whenever the full moon's out. And it's like, oh, are they werewolves? And it's like, no, they're just drunk. Don't worry about it. Like, and so it's like, okay, well, I need to change it to be like, hey, every night. Like, it's fine. Like, you don't have to get, you know.
Yeah, sometimes you can get a little too, and that was kind of a problem I had with writing Ninja Punks because I like very grandiose language. I'm sure if Bob, if you've read any of it yet, or you know, Holly definitely noticed that I like grandiose language. Just I guess I'm just, you know, I'm a large person, so I like large language. I don't know.
but real quick, if that's you, then you talk like that, which you do. I mean, I'm listening to you right now. You're an intelligent guy, so it matches. Like if everyone knows I am not an intelligent guy. So if I'm going to use some even Yeah, even Grandiosa had to use a thesaurus.
My parents
Like-
would not. Yeah, my parents would not agree that I'm a smart guy at all. My parents would be like,
No,
Mom,
there's a difference
Mom, if you're
between
listening-
intelligent and smart.
like, Mom, if you're listening, I don't agree with him. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, Jeff. Go ahead.
It's all good. But yeah, no. It's I feel like if you inject, like they say, to kill your darlings, so which is to say, I don't think it's kill them, it's to make them as palatable as possible, because your darlings, whether you try to consciously kill them or not, they're gonna show up regardless, because it's a matter of who you are as writing. So it's in your best interest to actually consciously limit them as much as possible. So when they do hit, you're like, wow, this guy's really good, rather than, oh my God, would you shut the F up? You know? Yeah.
Yep. True.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I feel about it. And like, yeah, like, so yeah, I do feel in my editor, he said a lot like, do you really need to be describing him like this? I'm just like, yeah, I probably don't. So I'll make it a little more, mundane, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like the best time, like when to show don't tell, would be introducing characters. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the character. It kind of depends on how serious they are too. I mean, and you could also show something about them, and the show is kind of a tell too. Like, for instance, like there's a scene in the second chapter or third chapter of Ninja Punks where Brian, whose mom died of cancer before the start of the story, he comes home and he sees his dad effectively on a date with a woman, and the woman is at Brian's mom's seat at the table, and he gets infuriated, and he basically starts yelling at the woman, and tells her to get out, calls her some not very nice things, and the woman gets up, and she's wearing a dress. On the backbone, you can see she's got a burn mark on her back. So that is, you are telling the reader that she has a burn mark on her back, but also you are showing something about her that, that perhaps there's more to her than what Brian thinks, and at that point, Brian just thinks she's a succubus trying to basically make him miserable. That's basically what Brian thinks at that point now. So
yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Another nice thing as well about being able to show instead of telling is that it helps you avoid info dumps. So if you save all of your description for just like one area, and you're not really, if you spend too much time telling, then all of a sudden you feel like you get this urge, like, oh, I have to show everything, and suddenly I have to describe the entire room, and then you're spending, 3 paragraphs describing what the bedroom looks like, in taking up all this extra word count, which, as we all know, word count is almost impossible to get where it's supposed to be as it is. And so being able to weave that actually into your character's emotions, or using their sensories and things like that, it's going to reduce the amount of info dumping you're doing, and it's going to make the story flow a lot more.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, like, ways to find ways to describe characters. So like, I think one of my favorite descriptions of a character in my first book, I describe him more with the way that he's taking care of the items in his office than I actually describe him. And it's like, all of his stuff is like, metallic, very utilitarian, except there's this one like ornate desk that's been there for, it looks like, 100+ years. And he's like very meticulously cared for. It's like, it tells you a lot about who he is. It's like, okay, what he cares about, all that stuff. And it's like, it doesn't really matter what his hair color is or what that, it's like, I'm telling you who that character is, not necessarily what they look like, because that's not the important thing to, at least to me. And like, I'm sorry if I have readers that want to know all the ins and outs of like freckles and all that, but that's not what they're getting out of me. So.
I mean, and kind of like the way I see the description is like, ultimately readers are going to superimpose what they envision a character as on the character. Like, for instance, in Sanderson,
Mm.
Stormlight Archive, the character Shallan has red hair. Like he says that very often that she has like red hair.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend, actually the friend who first told me about the book series. His name's Chris, and we were talking about this was like a decade ago. But he said how he always saw Shallan as a blonde woman. I'm like, it says in the book she's got red hair. He's like, oh really? I always saw her as blonde. And I was like, well, okay, so
skipped over it.
yeah, I mean, kind of.
I mean, it happens.
Yeah, so I mean, so you know, I mean, I think folks read books for different reasons, and I think if you don't read it for kind of that very sensory or like very empirical experience, you want something more from it, then yeah, I mean, you will just gloss over that, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's like I could say, you know, oh, the character had like, you know, a broken nose and a cut going over an eyebrow and like it was a little misshapen. Or I could say, oh, he had a face only a mother could love. And it's like, okay, which one of those am I going to go with? So like,
yeah,
for me,
exactly.
it's the second one.
Exactly. And like, and dude, oftentimes, if I'm reading a book and it's very description heavy, I don't remember what any of these guys look like at the end of the book. I'm like, right. I think he's got a ponytail, but I don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, like that's why I used to think that I hated reading because it's like I remember being in, you know, middle school, high school, and then being like assigned Dickens, and I'm like, I don't need 2 paragraphs talking about the dinner table, Dickens, and then you give it to us 2 chapters later because it's like produced in serial, and it's
in Dickens' defense, he was paid by the word.
Well, yes, for sure. And you know, I get it.
I stretch this for as much as possible.
Well, yeah, and it's also produced in serial, so that's why it feels very repetitive. It's because it's like, oh, you haven't read this in a week, so like, let me give you a refresher of what happened last chapter.
Yeah,
and so like, it was never intended to really be mushed together, which is part of the frustration. So
but yeah, I actually do enjoy Dickens, but you know, not in like the. But yeah, like, you know, I'm also kind of weird. Like, I don't like Hemingway that much. I know it's sacrilege. I don't care. Like,
well, I was also an a-hole kid, so if you assigned anything, I wasn't gonna like it.
Yeah, that's kind of like, but like, perfect. But like, my thing with Hemingway is that like, I like his style. I don't like that everyone tries to copy his style, and it makes his style not fun to read anymore. Because I'm just like, so many books, like so many books write in that fashion, so many papers write in that fashion, and it definitely has merit to it. It's just when every book is like that, I'm like, this is boring, guys. Come on, let's vary it up, you know? Yeah.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that. I read something once. I was having this conversation with a friend about this thing that I read, and it was something like most people who write fantasy want a lot of their characters to kind of have that like old English feel because that's kind of the world that fantasy takes place in. And so I was like, in my story, I mentioned something about coffee, and she's like, well, they wouldn't have had coffee back then. And I'm like, it's not back then. And I think Austin, we've had this conversation before, and it makes me so crazy because I'm like, it's your world. It's whatever you want it to be.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? Like, it's so funny.
So you can say to that criticism in Heir to the Empire by wow, I'm blanking on his name. I should be ashamed of myself.
Yeah, I know what you're talking. Yeah, I can't remember his name either. Actually.
Wow, I'm ashamed.
It's
of
actually
myself.
It's over here somewhere. Oh, Timothy Zahn. Timothy Zahn.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy Zahn. I'm sorry, but anyway, but yeah, in that book, he has Luke at the beginning drinking a cup of hot chocolate. So like, so it
was something exotic. Remember? Yeah.
It's just like it doesn't always need to be something grandiose. Like it can be something mundane, even if it's like in a fantasy world. I feel like so. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Well, and it's fun too because it's like you always like have this idea of like, oh, what does their accent sound like or whatever. And so like I purposely for one of my like worlds, I was like, okay, the world is like Buria, like Buria is like the way I originally pronounced it. I'm like, you know what? No, it's gonna be Western, so it's Buria. Everybody's gonna have like a thick Southern drawl, and it's not gonna make any sense, and it's fine. And everybody's gonna be dropping their G's in this fantasy world because it's just as legitimate as having, you know, posh elves.
Yeah,
so.
And that's kind of like, you know, and again to bring us back to like, you know, the Star Wars prequels, everyone who criticizes like Attack of the Clones, like with all of that romantic dialogue, it's like, think about, it's very upper society. Anakin was not very he was not very conscious of his feelings. Let's say he was just kind of like all the time. He didn't know how to and he was this 18-year-old awkward kid who has to watch probably the hottest girl in the galaxy. Like, he's probably going to be
also raised by an emotionally repressive cult.
It's just like, how do you like
that left his mother in slavery?
Yeah.
Like, got him out of slavery and left his mom.
Yeah, so I'm just like, given those circumstances, how would you expect for him to speak? Like, I don't know. Sorry, that's just I always managed to get back to the Star Wars prequels because I had to suffer just decades of like, those movies are trash. George is dumb. Jar Jar's dumb. And I'm just like, oh my god. I was like, okay.
Is this why you became a fighter?
Here.
No, it's not why. No, it's not why.
But I will say the dialogue in the original trilogy is no better than in the prequels. So
it's not. It's just sorry. I always managed to get back to Star Wars.
I think we did this last time, actually. I think you and I both really like the prequels more than the average person.
Yeah.
It's just so many of the criticisms, I feel like they just don't get what George was going for. And I'm actually a legitimate believer. I don't know if you look at my Instagram. I actually do think that Darth Jar Jar actually was at some point the intention.
Yeah, I
think it was at some point. Like, there are some weird things like
conspiracy theories.
Yeah, sorry. let's avert course. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll be here. Sorry, I'll be here.
Show us Jar Jar is becoming a Sith Lord, not tell us.
I mean, he kind of did. He did overthrow the entire empire. So whether they tell us or not, he is the one that destroyed the Republic and set up the empire. Yeah. So they showed us him being the
Well, also, what's interesting, if you understand like Campbellian archetypes, is that like Yoda was that master on a log that you think is just someone you walk by because he's acting like a jackass when you first meet Yoda, which so is Jar Jar. And basically, Qui-Gon meets Jar Jar in a swamp. Luke meets Yoda in a swamp. And if you get to the scene where Jar Jar jumps into the water, it's shot the exact same way as Yoda pulling the X-Wing out of the water.
Okay.
It's the exact same shot. It's crazy. So I mean, and George is big on that kind of stuff. Again, let's just get back on track.
He's very deep. Yeah. Holly has something.
I do. Actually, just to help some people out who are maybe new to this, what are some ways? What are some ways that we can show people how, instead of like, what are some not necessarily like an example, but how are different ways that we can do it? So like, we know that we can use sensory details, right? We can describe how something feels, how something looks, how it tastes or smells, right? We can do all of that. But what are some other ways that we can do that?
I think for me, something that is important is like what I was saying earlier. It's like you can know something and you can feel something. And like if you can describe something with the way it makes your character feel or your perspective feel or your narrator feel, like that's so much more important than like what is actually happening. So if you can get that, even if you're skipping by actual sensory details to get into the feelings of it, like if I'm talking about my life, I could tell you anything. Like it's not a big deal, but talking about how I feel is vulnerable. And it's the same thing
revealing through action, maybe, like instead of saying like, oh, my character is angry, they're like, thin-lipped, or they press their lips in a tight line, or like something like that. Like, are you like to show how the character is? Like revealing it through actions, I guess would be the best way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, sorry. But
that, but then also like just being like, instead of just saying like, oh, hey, they did this or whatever, like, oh, I don't like that person for whatever reason, like talking about like, oh, I could like the blood boiling or whatever. Like it can still just be super emotional language. It doesn't have to be things that you actually are seeing. it can still be telling in that sense, but you're getting into the emotional side of things, and I think that shows a lot more than gets into that a lot more. But maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
No, Jeff, you're a special guest.
Sorry, man. I talk a lot. I got a lot of ideas in my head.
Please do.
But yeah, like, I think to what Holly was saying is that, like, I like to show how a person physically reacts to emotion. I feel like that's the best way to show emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, like, I say, like, oh, he furrowed his brow, he stomped up to him, he skipped lightly or whatever. Like all those things, they denote different emotions.
Yeah. I think
another way.
Go ahead.
Another way to do this is through dialogue, which is my favorite to do.
Yes.
Instead of describing a character coming into the room and doing something, maybe he walks in and then they start talking, and we can actually kind of build character through another character. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And kind of do it like, oh, that's what's going on. That's why. Or, through subtext or what have you.
Absolutely.
That's another way to put it.
Yeah.
I think actually you've touched on a good point, Bob, where I think ultimately the goal of showing is to accomplish multiple things in one sentence or thought, and telling can really only accomplish one thing, which is just, was the sun shining? Were you angry? Were all those things. So, like, I feel like the more versatile you can make your sentence in levels of description, the better. And I think that's the main difference between showing versus telling. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. I don't know. Yeah. I've written one book.
Yeah. And I think something for me that, like, as we were talking about just now, that I thought about is, for me, the importance of showing is so much more important when it's the non-perspective character.
Yeah.
Because I don't have an insight into their head, theoretically.
Yes.
And so it's like, my character is seeing what they're doing, and then I show, this is what the character sees, and then I tell how they interpret that, even if it's completely wrong.
That's definitely true. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And that's kind of
go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it also shows, it also makes the non-POV character more complex, because if you've written that character before as a POV character, you have a cool opportunity to have the which present themselves, which is which is a very good way to make drama, Yeah.
Which, you had brought up Shallan earlier. So, like, you get chapters that are from her perspective, but then you get other people's perspectives of her, and you don't ever have to have her describe her own hair or things like that. Like, you get to have other people describe her, like, in how she's acting and all that thing. But the nice thing is you can have those play off of each other. It's like, she might see herself one way, and then another character sees her as, like, oh, this confident, kind of overconfident.
I was going to say, Shallan describing herself is
so different. Yeah.
I'm like, man, you need therapy.
She's very self-deprecating. So it's very interesting, because you get the difference between her description of herself and then the way Kaladin sees her. And it's just like, there could not be more opposite.
Yeah.
Well, I like how this show went. Oh, Holly, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, I also really love to use description of the environment around my characters to reflect their emotions and show it that way. I have a character in the book that I'm currently working on who's very sensitive. She has, like, very, very heightened senses, more than, another person would. And so I really stress when she's in a forest, like, how quiet the forest is. And that in turn kind of helps understand it just reflects on her character a little bit, because then it's understanding, like, she's really appreciating the silence of the forest, and that's why she really likes being in the forest, because it's so quiet compared to anywhere else would just be extremely loud and very uncomfortable for her. And so I've also, you can also do it with, if you have a character that's very upset and, talking about the storms rolling in, and you can relate your character's emotions to that. And so I just think that there's so many ways for us to be able to do it, that it's like you can use a combination of everything. You can kind of stick to one that you prefer. But there's a lot out there for you to utilize.
And that kind of makes me think too, is like if you have an observant, like Sherlocky character, like don't tell me they're observant, just like show me all the things that they're observing around them. Or if you have kind of a ditzy kind of a character, they just like walk through a building and like don't even notice anything, and it's fine. Like that's just who they are.
But I do actually like what Holly was saying to try and relate your character to outside things. Like, for instance, like you can laugh at me all you want. I think whoever wrote, just go with me on this, please. Just go with me. Whoever wrote Vegeta's dialogue for like for those early Funimation versions of Dragon Ball Z was actually a very good writer, because like the part where he shows up and goes Super Saiyan and he recounts how it happened. He says like, "Oh, it was an outward manifestation of the storm raging inside me." I'm like, that's awesome. I'm like, that's awesome as hell. Like, I'm like, as a kid, I was like, yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of what Holly was talking about. I don't expect she likes Dragon Ball Z. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point too, like I think that's something that I enjoy about like the way Eldritch Horror is written, is like it's a lot of the characters fumbling to try and explain themselves in dialogue. It's like it was like this or this, but like also like this, but maybe none of those things. I don't know. It's complicated, and like just letting things be weird and ambiguous explains a lot about what's going on in the character as well as the world, and that's fine.
Yes, I think ambiguity can be a very good descriptor in and of itself, especially if you're writing like a mystery novel or something like that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
All right. Well, you know what, guys? It's time for our don'ts. This is our portion of the show where we tell you something that you shouldn't do, or don't, or be a rebel like us and write these down and go, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. But
I'm being a punk.
Yeah, he's being a punk. But I like where the show went. Honestly, you know, I wrote down in the show notes, hey, we're going to talk about this. And we're all just sitting here like, oh, okay, we'll just start talking. But this has actually turned out to be really, really good. I actually like this one.
That's kind
of the other ones.
Yeah, not the other ones.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Starting with this one.
I like this now.
Episode 38.
Yeah, sorry if I talk too much. I have a lot in my mind all the time.
No, it's perfect.
No, you're not talking too much. No, I'd rather have that, Jeff. Please. I'd rather than somebody just quiet. Like, okay, let's. Anyway,
all right, well,
time for our don'ts. Here we go.
Observer.
Time for our don'ts. So when showing and not telling, don't do this.
Yeah.
What would we do?
I would say don't use fancy dialogue tags, because even like the dialogue tag asked, I always pretty much use said, just because you should be able to infer by what's being said, as well as the actions associated with the dialogue, to say the fashion, to discern in the fashion, to discern in what fashion something was said. So like if there's a question mark already there, you don't need to say ask because the question mark's there.
Well, then the whole sentence should be a question. So it's almost like we're doing it. So I mean, tons of people do it. I mean, J.K. Rowling's got it all over the place. But like you do, you know, hey, where's the syrup? She asked. Like, you know, I asked kind of a thing.
Yeah,
so it does seem silly. That's a good one.
But also like too, like so that's kind of. I feel like just relying on bland dialogue tags makes you have to be more creative with showing how something was said rather than telling how it was said. That I feel like it's simple, but honestly, simple is better. And I'm saying that as someone who wrote the intro to his book in like semi-Homeric prose. So
yeah. And to your point, the simpler your dialogue tags are, the easier it is for the reader to just skip right over it, not even notice it, and get back to whatever else is happening while acknowledging who is actually having the dialogue. So that's a good point.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to go ahead and kind of piggyback off of that. Don't overemphasize on accident. Like, you've got to pay attention to what is important and how much you're showing. Because, like, yeah, it's show versus tell. But, like, again, it's not show, don't tell. It's show versus tell. You have to figure out where that balance is based off the scene that you're working on. So don't just go full, I'm only going to show and don't tell you anything. Because then your, epic fantasy is going to be 1,000,000 words long, and you'll never actually get out of the Shire, and it's it's kind of a nightmare because you still got the one ring in your pocket. So,
all right,
that's fine.
Ollie, anything?
Yeah, so I want to say, don't worry too much about it in your first draft. Because this is how I got so stuck on my first draft, because I was worried that I wasn't giving enough description and that I wasn't giving enough information on how my characters were feeling, and then the dialogue wasn't expressing it enough. And I spent so much time fretting about that in my first draft that I ended up rewriting half of it anyways. So if you're writing and it's flowing out and that's fantastic, then absolutely run with it and get as much description in there as you possibly can. But if you're writing and you feel like, oh, I'm doing way too much telling right now, but you're still in a good flow, don't worry about it, because that's what your second and third drafts are for, to refine that. So don't get, as much as we say, like, show us, don't get caught up on it if you're busy writing your first draft, because it is okay.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, sorry. I was saying I agree. Yeah. I was saying I agree.
Okay. I'm going to say resist the urge to explain. So don't over-explain stuff, because as readers, we like to figure stuff out. We're adults, you know what I mean? Like in a children's book, maybe even then, I think kids really need to use their imagination. But you may want to explain how, I don't know, like how a magic knife works or something. But what if it was just, I'm just giving a wacky example, but what if it was just, they just called it, Doom Blade, and that was it? Just leave it. Like, there's no history. Let me figure it out. I would rather do that, That's right. Yeah, he whipped out Doom Blade and cut this guy in his half, and all this. He disappeared in a vapor of I don't know, purple vapor. A vapor of purple vapor. That's exactly how I'm gonna write that. But yeah, just so don't go too crazy with your explanations about stuff. Leave some for the reader to deduce and figure out.
Absolutely.
That'd be mine. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Jeff, thank you. What's good? Yeah. No. Where can we find you again, Jeff?
So you can find me on Instagram at Jeff Nelson Author. I don't have a website up yet, because you don't end up training jiu-jitsu to the extent that I did if you are a well put together and organized individual. I'm just hitting that. That's just the truth. I'm working on it though. I am working on the website, but so far my Instagram is at Jeff Nelson Author. That's the best way to find me.
Okay. And you got your book coming out called
Ninja Punks Fuck Off.
Amen. And then it's coming out October 30th, right?
Yes. Yes. That. Yeah. Like
30-ish.
Yeah. 30-ish. Yeah.
End of October.
End of October. Right on.
More or less.
How exciting. That's going to be so fun, man. Yeah, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon. But yeah, just follow on Instagram. Follow Jeff at Jeff Nelson Author on Instagram, and he'll keep you up to date on that. But yeah, Jeff, fantastic. I'm glad we brought you back. You're a blast. Great guy to talk to.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you guys having me. It's really nice.
Yeah. God, this hour went by so flipping fast, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, hour 2 is going to be all about Star Wars, and that'll be Austin and Jeff only.
Don't worry, we'll pull you in with how we talk about the importance of the Trade Federation.
Yeah, no, you guys need your own podcast on that. Absolutely.
Just kidding. Now there are 2 of them. That's the first thing I say when it was getting out of the past. Now there are 2 of them.
That's perfect, man. All right. So, hey guys, don't forget to subscribe to our channels. Hey, I just want to let everyone know we have 60 subscribers now on our YouTube channel.
Yay!
Yay! Thanks very much. And we're getting close to 700 downloads on Spotify and iTunes. So, if you listen there or watch on YouTube, please hit the subscribe and like button. Well, we also would love to learn all about you. If you have a book, you're an author, up and coming author, or you've been around forever and you want to talk to us, please get in touch with us. If you got questions or what have you, we'd love to find out more. So this is what happens when I go off script. And now I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, let me just read from what I've written. We always love to hear from our listeners. So if you have a question or a topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. Until then, goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Have a good one, guys. Thank you.